we're going to talk about something that I think we have talked about, but maybe not the way we have, or maybe not rightly understood its full impact. But the question is, why don't we talk about certain things? And I want to suggest, before we dig into the topic, that a lot of times this is driven by fear. There is a fear associated with some of these topics that, but what if I'm wrong? Or what if somebody knows I believe that? Or what if I actually have to do something about that? And I think that's going to be, we're going to see as a real reason why sometimes we as a church struggle with talking about the topic we're talking about to its full extent, to its logical conclusion. Because I will suggest that if we fully embrace what the Bible teaches about this topic, it is a huge demand on us. It's a good thing. It's a great thing. It's something that gives purpose and meaning to our lives, but it's one that also demands a lot. In a very good way, but a very real way. We're going to be talking about faith and human dignity. What does it mean to be human? Why does it matter? I want to start with a quote here from R.C. Sproul. He is an author, pastor, theologian. He wrote this: Christianity teaches that human dignity is rooted in the holiness of God. It reflects God's dignity. That is because human beings are made in the image of God. The Creator, who possesses infinite value and worth, has stamped us with a value and dignity that is derivative of His own value and dignity. Lose that idea, and you have lost any transcendent, foundational reason to treat human beings any differently than you treat a dog, a dolphin, or even a weed. And he's a little bit more I want to share, but this is one of those side roads. I'm an animal lover. We had our first Men of Grace meeting yesterday morning, where we got up early, ate donuts, and drank coffee, and laughed a lot, particularly at Jason. I mean, he was kind of the butt of a lot of our jokes. But we had a good time. But one of the questions, we had this little survey we filled out, was what did you want to be when you were a kid? What did you want to grow up to be? Do you know what I wanted to be? Any guesses what little kid Brad wanted to be when he grew up? My parents aren't allowed to answer.
Dog catcher.
No. I wanted to be a skunk doctor. Do you know why I wanted to be a skunk doctor? Because driving down the road, and this was before electronics and all that stuff, and a little wood-paneled station wagon, I would sit there, leaned up against that little triangle corner window because I was shoved in the back, and I'm just kind of staring out as we're going by, and do you know what you would see at the side of the road? Dead skunks that had been hit and run over, and they were just left there, and nobody cared about them. Man, if that was a dog or a cat, somebody would have been heartbroken, but those skunks had nobody. And I wanted to be the doctor that fixed those skunks. Now, I didn't quite go down that vocational track, but that was my heart. I love animals. I've loved every pet I had growing up. I love the animal we have now. The thing is neurotic. It's like 16, 17 years old. It is blind. It is deaf. It walks into walls. This thing smells like death. I mean, it's gross, but I love this little guy, okay? I love animals, and I make jokes about hating cats and, terrible, awful things I would do to cats, but you can ask my wife. One time we were staying at an apartment, and a stray kitten showed up outside our little patio door, and I was completely wrapped, okay? Like, I was doing my best to try and protect and keep and make the cat fall in love so it never left. Yeah, I'm an animal lover. But I have to say something. Your cat, your dog, is not your child. Your cat, your dog, though important, valuable, and wonderful, and I love them. They are not the same as people. The image of God sets us apart. And that does not diminish the worth or value of the animal. It heightens the value of humanity. And we have to hold that distinction. It's important. It actually affects how we view all of life and the decisions we make. R.C. Sproul continues, he says this: it is no accident that the two greatest commandments are love of God, and love of neighbor. You cannot have the latter without the former. And those who truly have the former will also have the latter. For if we love God, the God of infinite dignity, we will also love people because they reflect, however imperfectly, because let's be honest, we're imperfect with it, his dignity. Our notions of dignity are ultimately based on God's dignity and our being made in God's image. How we view humanity determines how we treat humanity. It determines what we think of ourselves. It determines what we think of the people sitting beside us in this room. It affects and determines what we feel about our family and our friends. But it also informs what we feel about our enemies, about those who frustrate and annoy us, those who get on our last nerve and make us cry out for the Holy Spirit to keep us from murder, right? How we view the image of God affects all of that, and it must. We have to rightly view it. So we are talking about faith and human dignity. And this week is really important. Depending how it goes, we might even go a little short this morning because I don't want to overcomplicate this because it really lays the foundation for almost every other week yet to come. We've already talked about faith and doubt. That was our first week where we said it's okay to question. God is big enough to handle your doubts and to handle your questions. Whatever question, whatever doubt, you throw it to God. If he cannot answer your question, he's not worthy of your worship. And I mean that wholeheartedly. And I have spent a lifetime throwing questions at God. I've had a lifetime of having those in my life hurl questions at God, and I look and I see his response. I see how he answers it through his word and through the complexity and beauty of his creation. And I'm like, yeah, he can handle that. He can handle any question. We've talked about that and how we as a church, as a group of those who follow Jesus, have to be okay with doubt, just like Jesus was okay with Thomas's doubt. We've asked some of these questions. Last week we applied it to mental health. And we said that we must get rid of the stigma around mental health. We must embrace what it means to have health and hope and healing for our bodies, but for our minds and our souls as well. And we said, yes, ultimately, Jesus is the true solution to every problem sin ever brings, but that doesn't negate how he mediates his grace through means, such as through therapy and medication and treatments. And we have to be willing to address these things. But those questions, mental health as well, that actually relies on the fact that we believe people are worth helping. We believe people are worth health, being healthy. All of it kind of builds on this foundation of how we see humanity. And I want to start with this singular idea that we have to hold on to, and that is that every human is created in the image and likeness of God. Understand this, there is not a single human being who has ever been, whoever will be, or whoever is right now that does not bear the divine image and likeness of the Lord God Almighty. And that gives us value. It gives you value, me value. But it also gives everyone value. And this is where our fear interrupts our consistency when we talk about the dignity of human life. We love valuing the dignity of those we naturally love. It's really hard to uphold the dignity of those who tick us off, of those who even annoy us, let alone those who wound us, those who have traumatized us, those who have brought suffering and terror into the lives of others. I am not excusing any of that. And that's why this tension is so hard, because while you have this repugnant activity by people, and we will rightly repudiate that, we will call it evil, we will rain down justice on it, but those who commit it are yet still made in the image of God and are worthy of dignity and respect because of it. That is a hard balance to hold. And if we don't admit that, we're lying to ourselves, and I guarantee you, you will not hold that balance well. Because to hold it, we have to understand that it's difficult. But let's look where we get this. The essential place, you see it in Genesis in three places, but the most direct is in Genesis chapter 1. And these are two verses that if you have connection with church, or maybe you've been to a wedding, and even if maybe you don't, you've probably run into these verses from the creation account where God talks about how he created everything. It says, for the creation of humanity, chapter 1, verse 26, God said, "Let us make man," and by the way, man here is the term that can be used as humanity. It's not saying just the male counterpart. "Let us make man in our image and after our likeness." And as a side note, if you really want to dig into this idea of the image of God, what in Latin is called the imago Dei, or the imago Dei, we spent 5 weeks looking at this in January of 2021. And I said I wanted to start that year off because this concept of the image of God is absolutely foundational to our theology, especially our practical theology. What do we do in life? So I'm not going to answer all your questions, but if you want to go back, you can find that on our website. You can find that on our YouTube channel. You can hear us kind of dissect this over 5 weeks. But this idea of image and likeness talks about kind of the fullness of how we were fashioned. These two words are selem and demuth. Selem is image, demuth is likeness. And they can be used almost interchangeably. They relate to one another, but there are some distinctions. Image is talking about representation. It's like delegated authority. If I am, in ancient times when the Bible was written, someone who bore the image of the king, this was royal language, they would speak with the authority of the king. I bear the image of the king, what I say has authority. So those of us made in the image of God, we are to bear his authority, that means bear his will, into the world. And this word likeness, which is demuth, this is about kind of likeness. I mean, that's why the word is translated as likeness. It's similarities. We've often talked about it in theological circles as the characteristics of God that are transferable. Meaning, like we can't bear his characteristic of infinity. You know, he is infinite because we have a beginning, right? But we can bear likeness to his characteristic of love, to his characteristic of grace, of mercy, of kindness. Those characteristics that are not infinite, we can be those who do those in the world. So as we represent his authority in the world, as a species, as a race, humanity, we represent his authority. We are supposed to act like him. We are to be seen by everyone else, by the rest of creation. Creation looks at each one of us and sees, that's what God is like. That's what God would do. That's what it means to have the image and the likeness. It is the authority, the representation, and then acting like God would act. So God said, make man in our image, after our likeness. And then he says, let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, over the livestock, over all the earth, over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. And so God created man in his own image. So what is this word dominion? This is a term of hierarchy. And that's where I said, this image sets us apart from other critters. And as good as critters are, as wonderful and enjoyable and pleasant and beloved that critters and animals and creatures can be, they are not the same as humanity. And in fact, humanity is to have dominion. Now, this term has been abused. This means, well, we can do whatever we want to this creation, right? We've been given dominion over it. And quite frankly, systems of government and of economics and a whole host of other things have used this concept to abuse the creation that God has entrusted to us. Dominion doesn't mean use for whatever you see fit. Dominion means manage well, and in this case, on the behalf of another. So as we reflect God, as we bear his authority, as we act like him, That is how we show this dominion, this hierarchy, meaning, yes, I am in a position of authority when it comes to creation, but not to use for my own selfish gain. I am to cultivate, I am to nurture, I am to use in rightful ways for the glory of the one I represent. That's what dominion means. And that's, it says, how God created humanity, in his own image. That is, each and every one of us. We are not a random happenstance of biological and genetic chance. The biblical model aligns not with random evolution, but with what is called creation. That God intervened in a supernatural way into the natural order of the universe in order for humanity to exist the way that it does. Now, we don't know exactly how he went about doing that, but it was supernatural and intervening. And that is something that the Bible affirms even in its unique creation of humanity. So in the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. I have been in church since I was in diapers. Anybody else? Can anybody else say that? Yeah, a few of you, not everybody. I'm the Christian donut, if you haven't heard me say that before. Because my parents were connected to the Lutheran church when I was a baby, so they did the right thing, and they did the infant baptism, and they sprinkled me with water. And then they went to a different church, and I made a profession of faith, and I got baptized by being dunked in water. So I'm the Christian donut, sprinkled and dunked, okay? Laugh at them, okay? They're corny. Give me a little something. But my whole life has been connected to the church. And until recently, that phrase bore no controversy. Male and female, he created them. Can you see where in our culture today that particular phrase might have some controversy surrounding it? Is that fair to say? Okay. I'm not asking what your view is or if you think there should be, but we know that it exists. So a message where we talk about that has the opportunity to be contentious. Is that fair to say? So I'm not going to talk about it today. You got to wait. This is going to be one of our last messages. We are going to build towards it where we are going to talk about faith and sexuality, and this is going to be part of it. We're going to talk about some of the gender issues, but we're going to build towards it. But all I will say is that the sexuality of humanity, the gendering of humanity, is part of God's original design. Now, what that all means, we'll explore that. But what we can see here from these two verses, and then again, places like Genesis 5 and Genesis 9, we see this reaffirmed, that every human is created in the image and likeness of God. Every human is to bear the representation of God's authority and to act like him in this created realm. That is a truth. That is the basis of each and every one of our value, our worth, and our dignity. God made us in his image and just infused, poured in to us his worth. So that means that it is incredibly important to understand that how we treat others is how we worship God. How we interact, how we speak to, how we speak about, how we behave towards, all the things that we do in reference to others is a direct reflection of how we worship God. Because he says, this is my beloved creation. This person represents me. So how we treat that person is a direct reflection of how we view God. Because worship is showing the worthiness of God. And God says, I have transferred the reflection of my worthiness into this person. They represent me. So we cannot say that we worship God correctly, rightly, and treat others like trash. We cannot do it. That is antithetical to the biblical message. Now, the thing is, it's also vice versa. Because how we worship God will then direct how I treat others. If I see God as having value, then I'll see others having value because they're made in his image. And I show that I see God has value when I treat others like they do. It is vitally important, if I am going to worship God, that I love others. And if I really, really want to love others, it starts by rightly understanding and loving God to begin with. And we know this from Matthew chapter 22. This is the second place we're going to go this morning. In Matthew 22, Jesus is approached by some really smart religious people. These are the scholars of the day, the theologians, the seminary professors, not just the students that went to the school, but those who taught and ran the school. These are the guys who wrote the books. In the ancient Jewish culture, these would be the ones who wrote the Talmud and those kind of documents that explained the Hebrew scriptures. These are the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and they wanted to chat with Jesus, and they came to him, chapter 22, and looking at verse 35. One of them, a lawyer, asked him a question because he just really wanted to know Jesus' answer, right? No, you have to understand, this lawyer is intentionally trying to trick Jesus. He is asking this to catch him in something. Jesus is going to have to be super accurate to pass the test that this lawyer has proposed. And so what does he ask? Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? We would probably say, which is the greatest? The great commandment meaning that commandment which supersedes every other commandment in all, at that time, of the Hebrew Scriptures. All of that which pointed to Jesus. All of that which revealed God's will for his people to that point. What is the one thing that supersedes everything else? And look how Jesus responds. He said to him, you shall love the Lord your God when it's convenient, when you're not too busy at work, when your kids don't have weekend sports, when there's not just like a really good TV show on that was, Netflix dropped all the episodes at once, okay? You gotta binge straight through or you miss the context, right? You know, if those things aren't happening, then love God. I'll be honest. In our world today, that's kind of how we interpret this. You love God when you've got the extra time, when you've got a little extra fuel in the tank that you weren't going to spend somewhere else. But Jesus responds, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. What Jesus was saying here was not, oh, you see that the human body is neatly divided into three distinct entities, and that's what makes the person. This was a way of speaking which said the entirety, the totality of what makes a person, from physical to spiritual, material to immaterial, all of what you are, that is to go into loving the Lord. Meaning all of your mind, all of your heart, all of your soul, all of your body, all of who you are should be guided and directed by this one great truth of loving God. That's the great commandment. And he says that, verse 38, this is the great and first commandment. And yet he doesn't leave it there. And a second is like it. When we read that, we're tempted, I think, to say, well, hey, this is the great one, and you know, there's a runner-up that I should probably make mention of. That's how we tend to read it in the English. But this construction, the way it's written in the Greek and even in the cultural rhetoric of the day, of the ancient Near East Semitic area under the Greek and Roman influence, saying a phrase like this indicated synergy between two concepts. In fact, it was an interchangeableness, a inseparability of concepts. So the first requires the second necessitates the first. Meaning these two can only exist in union and symbiosis with the other. So don't think of the second as of lesser order. It just happens to be the second part of the first. And the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. We have to be careful here because we tend to be people of extremes. Have you noticed that? I mean, I think it becomes all that much more apparent in a year of politics, right? If you watch anything on any media, you will see that, and I'm just going to pick these two, whether it's Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, there is no nuanced conversation about those two individuals right now in our country. Regardless of which one, you will find sources that say that they are either the devil incarnate, here to bring about the subjugation of every human soul to rot in a burning inferno of hell for all days, or they are the divine Savior of our nation, to restore us to all the glory that is rightfully ours. Those messages are being shared equally about both people. Now, logic prohibits both of those things being true of both people. They can't both be true. But we tend towards extremes. There's no, well, hey, I really disagree with this, but there's some good here. We don't think like that. We think in extremes. So when we think you shall love your neighbor as yourself, we tend to go, well, that just means I just have to be all about everybody else and I never do anything for myself. No, it's qualified. It is love your neighbor as yourself. You are to care for yourself. And do you know why? Do you know why you're supposed to care for yourself? Do you know why you're supposed to love yourself? Any ideas? Oh, I don't think I did well on the first half of this message. You bear the image of God. And the image of God in you is just as valuable as the image of God in everyone else and in every one of your neighbors. So yes, you matter. You matter infinitely to the infinite creator of the universe. And out of that infinite care that we receive from God and should see in ourselves, we should love and appreciate ourselves. We are to love our neighbors in similar fashion. We are not to say, well, your needs come secondary. It is you are of equal worth. I am to love you as I love myself. Those two things, these two commandments, on those that depend all the law and the prophets, all of the scriptures leading up, all the holy words that the Jewish people had that Jesus looked at and said, all the Bible, all of it hangs on these two ideas that are synergistic to one: love God, love others. In fact, there are churches all around the world who have used that as, hey, this is like our mission statement. Love God, love others. Because that is the whole of our purpose in this world. You cannot do one the way you're supposed to without the other. So if you say, oh, I just love God so much but hate people, people annoy me, so I just avoid them and type nasty comments in the comment section below, right? That don't work. That is not loving God. Nor can you truly love others if you don't love God. You can do loving things. You can do kindness and compassion and mercy and grace. You can do pieces of it. But to truly, fully love another, you need to tap into the infinite love of the infinite Creator. And from that deep, deep well, you can love with a passion and a fury that will never run dry. That is why we say how we treat others is how we worship God. And in fact, we have to wrap it up saying that bearing God's image means loving other image bearers like God loves us. It's kind of a wordy one. It's a mouthful. Bearing God's image means loving other image bearers like God loves us. That could be a little confusing. So what does this look like? I'm going to go fairly rapid fire here. I'm not going to be able to fully explain these. Some of these we're going to be explaining in the weeks ahead. What I'm saying is we need to see how understanding that the others around us, that the rest of humanity bears God's image, that we are all made in his likeness, radically affects what we do. And if it doesn't, we are not following Jesus the way that we're supposed to. And so yes, on one level, I have to say, I'm speaking to like a select audience in one way. Meaning what I'm about to say, this is for those who have chosen to follow Jesus. But I hope if you're in a place where you haven't made that decision yet, that what you will see will be appealing, where you'll say, man, this makes a difference. This Jesus thing isn't just some religious thing to like check off on, hey, I did my good thing for the week or the day. This Jesus thing is more than just some religious deal. You see, following Jesus is a revolution of the soul. It is a restoration of brokenness and being brought back to healing and being fulfilled, back to our original purpose. The Bible teaches that we have sinned, all of us, and that sin, it separates us from God. That we owe a debt for our sin, which is that separation. And we can pay for that with our forever away from God. We can do that. We can make that choice. But God, seeing that that was the only way we could pay that debt, well, he said, you know what? I love these image bearers, these people that I've made in my image and my likeness so much that I can't abandon them to the fate they chose. So in that, Jesus came to earth, fully God and fully man, and what we call again in those fancy theological terms, the hypostatic union of the divine and the human. And Jesus, being fully God, lived a life and never sinned. So he never earned the debt that sin accrues. And yet he died a death for sin that he didn't owe. So when he rose again, victorious over sin, death, and the grave on the third day, he now has a payment for sin that he doesn't owe, that he can give to any who will accept it. That is the gospel in a nutshell. That God paid the price for our sins on our behalf. We cannot earn it. We can accept it. And when we do, that acceptance is saying, you get to switch place of who gets to be the boss. I will choose to follow you because you've paid my way. You've bought me. You've redeemed me from this separation so that I can be back with you. I want to follow you. And what does that look like? Well, I want to suggest it starts with advocating for some things. This good news should make us advocate for certain things. This change in us should make us act differently in these different scenarios. If you're at a place where that is not a decision you've made, I beg you, have a conversation with someone here before you leave. Talk to the person beside you. And why I say that is if they don't know how to answer your question, I want to talk to you both, okay? So if you're not sure about that, please don't leave here with questions, because it is the single most pivotal question every human will make in their entire lives. What do you have to say about Jesus? Okay? Because depending on how you answer that will affect how you read this list. And even for those who have chosen to follow Jesus, some of these things you're going to go, wait, what are you saying? I know there are going to be some hairs on the back of the neck that raise as I bring these things up. I'm not doing this to stir a pot. I'm not doing this to be trendy. I'm not doing this to be popular or to be unpopular. As I prepared for this, and this message in particular, because it's foundational, I have been praying and seeking the Lord for months what to do and how to approach it. And all I can say is, following Jesus and understanding the grace and the magnitude of that grace that has been given to me radically changes how I approach the rest of the world. And if I see others as truly being made in the image of God, it will change how I interact and how I think about others. And sometimes sin keeps trying to push its way back into our lives. And it's easy to give into things, like I said at the beginning, fear. To trust in me and I have to work this out, rather than trusting that God will accomplish things, that God can provide me with safety and security for what I actually need and not necessarily what I want, that I can trust him. I can be loyal to him because of who he is and what he's done. So I'm going to share this list. I'm not going to give a lot of commentary. We're going to talk about some of it, but this is one of those where these cards here might become very important today, where you say, hey, I'm not so sure about that thing you said. Can you talk about it? And you might look at some of this and say, some of those seem contradictory. I would suggest none of them are contradictory, but they do sometimes create tensions for us. So if I build it up enough, are you curious enough? All right, you're going to have to come back next week to hear that. I'm joking. All right, here's the thing. What does this look like? What does loving other image bearers look like? It starts in advocating for a series of things. And one of the most important in the news so much is preborn life. We must see preborn life as preborn image bearers. And I know this is a loaded area, a loaded topic of discussion. And if your life has never been touched by abortion or someone who's had to wrestle with the decision of abortion, you are very lucky. And there is no easy way to deal with it if that's been a reality. And unfortunately, the church has been very harsh in how it's talked about this topic in many ways. And we need to approach this topic advocating for the value, the dignity, the worth of life while still in the womb, while also fully advocating for respecting and honoring the value, the dignity, the worth of the woman bearing that life. One is not greater than the other. And there are a lot of questions there, and I made the decision not to dig into this. Initially, this was probably going to be the main one and spend most of our time talking about it, but there's too much nuance that I don't think me standing up here talking to you could ever really do justice to the nuance this topic requires. So if you have questions, I would love to set up a time where we can have a conversation one-on-one or even with a group of people where we can talk about it. But one of the things that, as I have researched over the years is if you've heard the very conservative, theologically conservative Protestant view of conception being the starting point for life. Has anybody heard that? Okay? That's a generally affirmed position within the Protestant theological camp. Do you know that is relatively new? That for the vast majority of church history, that was not when the church believed life began. That was a shock for me as I began thinking about this. That happened right around the time of Roe versus Wade, when that came in the American church and then kind of spread out beyond. Now, I'm not saying that it's wrong, but that's an interesting thing. Even Jewish thought, if you go back and you look at the Talmud, and I was actually encouraged and helped by Jason, who has some background there. In the Talmud, it's about 6 weeks of life. That is where the Jewish concept of when does a baby become alive, become a person, have personhood. The Jewish thought was around 6 weeks. So I am not saying that that is the right thing. I'm not saying that for the vast majority of church history, it was something called quickening. Have you heard of that? That was the point where the mother felt the movement of the child for the first time. That was the church belief for when life began. Okay? I'm not saying that that is correct. What I'm saying is there is nuance that is needed, and it also means we have to be a lot more humble than we've been, and a lot more gentle. Because I will tell you, at the heart of the heart, any woman who has had to go through an abortion for herself, that is a traumatic thing. And as much as it is sometimes in our media portrayed as, oh no, it's an empowering thing, it is a traumatic thing. And anyone faced with that decision needs to be embraced by the church with arms of compassion and love, because we see the dignity, yes, of the life in the womb, but of the mother as well. We must hold those things, and even though that creates tension, we must hold those both. We have to be better church. Wow, and at the end of it, what do we have to advocate for? We do have to advocate for preborn life. We also have to advocate for safe, nurturing, and stable environments for children. And this involves not just for our own. Yes, if you're a mom or a dad, you are primarily responsible for providing a safe, nurturing, and stable environment for your child, but that is not the only one that you are to advocate for. We're supposed to be advocating for that for all kids, because all kids deserve that. All kids are made in the image of God. So things like access to child care for kids. Right now there are a lot of kids who are left unsupervised because parents have to work to pay their bills, but simply cannot afford child care. And that's not for a lack of working hard. I worked with an organization called CrossNet over in New Holland. Does anybody know CrossNet? No, a good number of you. I was on the board there for, I think it was 6 years. And there was a lot of work done with poverty. And the amount of work a single mom with 2 kids needs to go through to get off of government support, this was 6 years ago now, I think. This woman need to go from being fully funded by social supports to making over $27 an hour to equal the supports that it took just to raise those two children and provide basic food, housing, and medical care. So don't tell me that a single mom who's working hard and really struggling to pay for childcare is slacking off. That ain't the case. We need to see the dignity in that, and what do we do to advocate for those children, and by proxy, their parents. We have to do that. I'll tell you, when my wife and I had our second child, and we were trying to figure out how to pay for childcare for two of them, you know, my wife working a full-time job as an office manager for a physical therapy department, if we put our kids into childcare, and this was 9 years ago, if we put both kids in childcare, we would have to pay all of her salary to cover childcare, you know, after taxes and after the health insurance, you know, took out all the money that came back and an additional $100 on top of it. We had to pay for my wife to work. That's the system we're in. We need to advocate for something different. We need to advocate for the basic needs of all people. We live in such affluence as a country, and if you broaden it out as a world, that realistically no one should be living in poverty. Nobody should be wondering where their next meal comes from. But there is a high percentage of American kids, United States American kids, who go through every single week with food insecurity, meaning they don't know if they will eat 3 meals a day, 2 meals a day, maybe not even 1 meal a day at any given point. One of the reasons there's been such a push for kids to have the free lunches over the summers from schools is because those kids, the only time they knew they were eating was when school was in session. That was the only time they knew they were having food. We should not be living in a place. We should not be allowing that to happen with the amount of affluence that we have, because you have to couple to that, you know how much food we throw away? From individuals to restaurants to all kinds of things. We throw away more food than it would take to feed everyone who is facing food insecurity. So we have to advocate for the basic needs, whether it's food, housing, clothing, any of those things. Because the dignity of each person who bears the image of God is so high. And that also applies to those who have done wrong. We need to advocate for the welfare of those in prison. And you might be saying, hold on a second, these are those who didn't care about the dignity of others. Why should we care about theirs? I'll tell you, I've heard that argument. Do you know what Jesus says about it? Do you know when you served me? Do you know when you loved me? This is what he's saying about the end of all time when we stand before him. He'll say, when you cared about those who are in prison. We find that at the end of the book of Matthew. Jesus literally says how we care for those in prison reflect our heart towards him as our Lord and Savior. So caring for those in prison, even those who have done wrong, even those who have done egregious wrong, we cannot say you deserve to be treated as less than human. That doesn't mean you ignore the wrongdoing. It doesn't mean there isn't recompense, absolutely, but we still need to care about the basic dignity and worth of everyone in prison. We need to be advocating for refuge for the oppressed and the desperate. Even Jesus was a refugee. He had to flee his country and live in Egypt because of persecution. The Egyptian or the Israelite people, for the bulk of their history recorded in Scripture, they were refugees. They were, in some ways, we'll use this phrase in our world today, illegal aliens because of what had happened in their life, whether it was things that they had done or the oppression of others. The fact of the matter is how we care for those who are facing oppression, those who are facing desperate situations, how we treat them reflects our view of God. And unfortunately, we have what's called a scarcity mindset. Do you know what that is? Scarcity mindset means you think you're going to run out, okay? And in our country, we had something that happened about 100 years ago that really kind of ingrained a scarcity mindset into our culture. Do you know what that was? Great Depression, where you literally didn't know if you were going to have food tomorrow or the day after that. or the day after that. And you scrimped and you saved and you made sure, you stretched everything, right? Unfortunately, though we've moved past scarcity into abundance, we still live in fear of scarcity. We need to start seeing that God, even beyond just our material blessings, that God said that He has come that we may have life and have it abundantly. That abundant life we have, that spiritual life, is not just one day. We live in it now if we will just do it. If we will just accept the fact that that abundant life is available to me now, and from that abundance, I can bless others. That applies to advocating for refuge for the oppressed and the desperate. I need to advocate for compassion, protection, and support of the abused. This is one we're going to talk about next week. How do we deal with faith and abuse? Well, I'll tell you, the church has been real bad with this. If you have not noticed in the news, the number of news articles that are just flying around about churches that have allowed abuse to happen, that have perpetrated abuse, that have covered up abuse, that have done little to bring restoration in, to advocate for the abused. We need to advocate for every ounce of the person who has been abused, especially at the hands of the church. We'll dig more into that next week, and I'll tell you, that's one that I feel woefully unqualified to speak to. I'm actually speaking to an expert in the field this week to provide some guidance on how to approach it. We need to advocate for equal justice and protection in law enforcement and prosecution, because in our system today, though it is designed for equity, the way it is actually enforced, you do not see that equal justice, that equal protection in those areas. There are different pockets and different areas where that simply doesn't happen. And that's not because the system itself is a terrible system. It's how we have chosen to apply it. And we need to advocate for that equity. We need to advocate for that fairness. Do you realize that in the Old Testament of our Bible, as well as the New Testament, particularly in the Old Testament, when you see the idea of justice being talked about, there are two kinds of justice that are talked about. There's retribution, that is like punishment. Like, think child, that's where you would, give them a smack on the bottom or something like that, okay? This is a punishment. It is pain for you to feel as punishment for what you did, and also hopefully so that you learn that your actions are harmful to others. Just as you felt harm, you harm others. That's retributive justice. There's also something called restorative justice, where the focus is not on the offender, but the offended, meaning that justice should be about seeking to restore to fullness the one who has been wronged. There's the theologians, the really smart Bible people, have tried to weigh it out, and they say between 75 and 80% of the time the word justice is used in the Bible, specifically the Old Testament, it is not retributive. It is not about punishment. It's about focusing on restoring those who have been wronged. Okay? And yet so often in our system, we look so heavily towards punish, punish, punish. And that skews then how we apply it. We need to advocate for that equal justice and protection. We need to advocate for care for the disabled and infirm. We have to stop looking down on someone who cannot work because of a disability as a mooch. And I say that not because I believe that even a little bit, but I have regretfully heard that too many times to say, if you cannot work, that is not an issue of laziness. That is an issue of brokenness. And we should lament sin and its effects wherever it goes, because sin is the brokenness within those who bear God's image. And it manifests in different ways. I've shared before, I am a diabetic. My pancreas does not work the way it's supposed to. It does not produce enough insulin. Sin has broken my body, particularly my pancreas, so that I don't have enough insulin. I'm not lazy and choosing not to produce enough insulin. I didn't make that choice. But that is how my body works. We have to stop looking at those who have, whether they're physical or mental disabilities, and they're not able to work, and looking at them as lazy or mooching. We need to advocate for care. We also need to advocate for healthcare agency, reform, and accessibility. It is tragic that people today have to choose between losing their house or getting a medical procedure done. That parents have to elect, I'm not going to maybe eat today or take my own pills because my kid needs a minor surgical procedure. And that's the world we live in. We have access to vast resources. And yet, for a variety of reasons, we fail to see the worth of the person the healthcare is designed for and pursue profit primarily instead. We need to advocate for that change when it comes to healthcare. We need to advocate for promoting nonviolence and peace, both personally and socially, societally. We have to stop saying that war is good. War is not good. Death is not good. Suffering is not good. There are times, yes, that it is necessary. But there is a huge difference between begrudgingly being willing to step into a situation of war and one where we monger it or we turn to it as war, whether on the actual war national level or in our own little lives where we resort to violence with our words or our actions. We need to advocate for that change. We need to advocate, lastly, for protection against the various isms in society. I will see, and by this we mean sexism, racism, ableism, ageism. There's lots of isms. And I will say, some of them are bullhunky, okay? Some of them have just been created by people to try to create you're just treating me like this to make excuses. But quite frankly, that's the vast minority. There are lots of isms that still plague our world, and we as a church need to speak into it because we see people not as a whatever-ist. We need to look at them as a human, as one who bears the image of God. But before we move past this list, it's beyond just advocating. I can put a social media post up. I can affirm in conversation the needs for these things. It's beyond advocating. I need to also take responsibility, meaning I have to be part of the solution. I cannot fix everything. You cannot fix everything. Our whole church, all of our resources combined, we can't fix everything, but we can be part of the solution. And when you have the opportunity to take responsibility, that's what it means to follow Jesus, is to advocate for the dignity of every person in your world. The intersection of faith and human dignity meets at love for others. This is where we're wrapping up for today. Literally our last slide. The intersection of faith and human dignity meets at love for others. And too often, we are willing to sacrifice the dignity of people in our world on the altar of my fear. I'm fearful of my world changing, of the things that I've held dear, the things that I've known, the things that have brought me joy or were important to me. I'm scared I will lose them, so I won't see the dignity in someone else. There are real issues in our world, and there's real sin in this world, and quite frankly, there's real evil in this world. I'm not saying there's not. I'm not saying that people shouldn't be held accountable for their actions. They absolutely should. You should. I should. Okay? That is absolutely vital. But we have to stop seeing people as things or obstacles or somehow lesser. They don't deserve what I do. I've worked harder. I'm more worthy of it. You're not. Not because you're less worthy, but because everyone is worthy because they're made in the image of God. That has to radically transform our approach, meaning when I see people, my response must be love. And love doesn't mean just giving you what you want. I know my kids would love for that to be love, right? So every time they ask, like my son beat a video game the other day, and the second he beat it, do you know what he said? All right, time to buy me the next one. Like literally, something called a DLC. It's the game, but they make you pay extra to add it on. The credits were still rolling, and he's like, well, I finished that. You need to buy me the next one. Do you know what love was for him at that moment? No. Okay? And I love my son to death. I do. But he needs to learn that just because you want something, you don't necessarily get it. That can be love. But we also use that excuse to harm others as well. We need to speak the truth in love to one another, to our world. We need to be known for our gentleness. We need to be known for our humility. We need to be known for our unity around love in the person of Jesus Christ, not for what we're against. So often this world looks at the church and knows what we're against. They don't know what we're for. Most people don't know that we're all about Jesus. The world looks at us and they don't see Jesus. They see what we hate. That is not love. Love conquers hate. But it can't just be a slogan. We have to advocate for these things, and we have to take responsibility.